They smiled. I had the proof, every hidden transfer, every lie documented. One sentence, and the room froze. Wine spilled. Faces went pale. Their perfect life collapsed. And for the first time, I was free. I lived a quiet, predictable life in a suburban neighborhood of Chattanooga, Tennessee in 2019. My days followed a rhythm I had grown used to, waking early, commuting along streets lined with oak trees, arriving at the modest office of a small architectural and construction firm, where I worked as a structural engineer. The work was steady, often repetitive, but it paid the bills and allowed me a sense of stability I had come to value. Ambition had never been a driving force for me. I measured success in completed projects, accurate calculations, and the slow accumulation of professional respect rather than in flashy accomplishments or titles. Emily, my wife, had a life that seemed complementary to mine. She worked in marketing for a local startup, earning a good salary and carving a career path with visible upward movement. From the outside, our lives appeared balanced. Our home was tidy and organized, filled with the kind of furniture and decor that suggested quiet taste rather than ostentation. Our car was reliable, not expensive, and we often drove to nearby states for short vacations, small excursions that reminded us that life had possibilities beyond our street. It was the kind of life that neighbors looked at and envied for its calm normalcy, a life that felt safe in its predictability. Yet beneath the surface, I could feel subtle pressures pressing against the edges of that calm. Emily's family had never fully accepted me, or perhaps they had accepted the version of me that was convenient for them to acknowledge. Her older brother Kevin, who ran a modest construction supply company, carried a quiet superiority that he did not hide. Every interaction with him was weighted. He had the ability to make a casual remark that left me doubting my own achievements, a skill honed over years of being unquestioned in his family. I began noticing the small details. The way his eyes lingered a second too long when I mentioned a project, the brief pause before he smiled, the almost imperceptible tilt of his head when he dismissed my explanations. Emily's reaction to these moments compounded the effect. She rarely spoke up, her expressions guarded, her body language neutral, as if she had been trained to maintain harmony at the expense of confrontation. Her silence, her unwillingness to challenge him, weighed on me more than his words ever could. I started keeping mental records, cataloging the ways in which my efforts were belittled, the casual comparisons to other men she knew, the subtle suggestions that I was adequate but not exceptional. Over time, it became impossible to ignore the cumulative effect. The standard set by her family was unattainable, not because of any deficiency in my work or character, but because it was defined by their need to reinforce a hierarchy, to measure value by displays of wealth, influence, and outward recognition. I began to feel isolated, trapped within a structure of expectations I had never agreed to, measured against ideals that were never mine. Even in the moments of quiet domestic routine, while Emily brewed coffee or arranged flowers in the kitchen, I was aware of an invisible ledger tallying my inadequacies. My accomplishments, however concrete, now felt invisible under the weight of these subtle judgments. The thought that I might always occupy the space of just enough gnawed at me. I observed the gestures, the pauses, the tones, and realized that the comfort of our outwardly steady life came with a hidden cost. The constant erosion of self-worth by the relentless, almost invisible scrutiny of those who define themselves by hierarchy rather than reality. The pressure built slowly, imperceptibly, but unmistakably. Every family gathering, every casual dinner, every mention of professional milestones felt like a test I was not permitted to pass. I carried the sense of being perpetually measured, always falling short, even when the evidence suggested otherwise. It was in these quiet, unremarkable moments, pouring cereal, checking blueprints, driving to the office, that I first recognized the subtle but persistent toll. The calm suburban life I had meticulously constructed was a veneer, concealing the tension and unease that came from being evaluated not on my own terms, but by standards I could never fully meet. And in recognizing this, I sensed the first stirrings of a need to confront the imbalance, though I had yet to understand the form that confrontation would take. I felt the tension building long before the family gathering began. The anniversary of Emily's parents' 25th wedding anniversary had been planned for months, each detail meticulously arranged to project perfection. The house had been scrubbed until every surface gleamed, fresh flowers lined the dining table, and the catering menu had been carefully chosen to impress. Music was selected to create an atmosphere of warmth and celebration, a subtle orchestration of familiarity and elegance. Despite the outward calm, I felt a tightening in my chest at the thought of Kevin's presence. His attention-seeking tendencies had always overshadowed the quiet moments of our lives, and I knew tonight would be no different. When the evening arrived, Kevin appeared in his brand-new SUV, a vehicle as polished and conspicuous as the confidence he carried with him. From the moment he stepped through the doorway, his presence commanded the space. He moved with deliberate confidence, exuding success in a way that was impossible to ignore. Subtle asides, comparisons, and faintly mocking observations followed him like a shadow. Each comment about my work, each mention of colleagues with larger contracts or loftier titles, felt designed to undermine me, to place me in a frame of perpetual inadequacy. Emily remained quiet throughout, her eyes cast downward, her posture neutral, as if the air around her brother were too fragile to disturb. I began to notice the minutiae of the room, the slight stiffening of my in-laws' shoulders, the barely perceptible glances between distant relatives, the way Emily's younger sister shifted in her seat when Kevin's words struck the table. Even the soft clinking of silverware seemed to echo the unspoken judgment in the air. Every motion Kevin made, every tone he used, became a potential trap, a test of my composure. I tracked his gestures and expressions with precision, noting the pause before a smile, the way his eyes would flicker in a challenge whenever my own accomplishments were mentioned. The more I observed, the more I realized that patience, long a shield against his provocations, was no longer sufficient. The quiet, habitual dismissals I had endured over the years were crystallizing into something tangible, a clear pattern of dominance that Emily silently permitted. Her lack of intervention amplified the psychological weight of his actions. It was no longer simply a family dinner. It was a carefully staged arena, with Kevin orchestrating every interaction, and me caught in the role of the perpetually judged. With every passing minute, the tightening in my chest intensified. The light hum of conversation, the casual laughter of relatives, the clatter of dishes, all became instruments of mounting pressure. I felt my thoughts narrowing, a mental ledger cataloging each slight, each implied criticism, each subtle comparison designed to reinforce his authority and my perceived inadequacy. I realized that the boundary between endurance and confrontation had grown fragile, that the next shift in tone or gesture could demand a response. As the meal progressed, I became acutely aware of how tightly everyone else was watching, how their silence contributed to the oppressive weight of expectation. Emily's quiet deference to Kevin's performance, the barely perceptible shifts in the posture of her parents, the tentative glances of extended family, all signaled a tense acquiescence to his dominance. I felt the space around me shrink with the accumulation of judgment and unspoken rules. In that constrained environment, I understood that I would soon face a choice: to continue silent endurance or to assert myself, to measure the cost of speaking out against the subtle, relentless erosion of my self-worth. When the main course was placed before us, the atmosphere shifted with a subtle, almost imperceptible weight. Kevin began speaking with a confidence that carried over the table, his tone deliberate, measured, designed to highlight the contrast between his successes and my perceived mediocrity. Each phrase he spoke felt sharpened, a scalpel carving into years of restraint I had maintained. Faces around the table froze. Some eyes widened with curiosity, others narrowed with apprehension. The room became a suspended space, each heartbeat amplified in my chest, each clink of cutlery echoing in the tense silence. I could feel the air thickening, charged with anticipation and unspoken judgment. Inside, I recognized the culmination of months, years of patient observation. The subtle provocations, the quiet diminutions of my achievements, the carefully orchestrated superiority. Everything had led to this precise moment. I felt a clarity I had never known before, a quiet but undeniable understanding that my endurance had reached its limit. The familiar anxiety that had accompanied family gatherings transformed into a resolute determination. I no longer questioned whether I should respond. I understood that inaction had already cost too much. I rose slowly, each movement deliberate, almost ceremonial. My eyes scanned the room, noting every detail with exacting precision. The crisp whiteness of the tablecloth, the polished silverware catching glints of the chandelier above, the way Kevin's hand trembled slightly as he rested it on the edge of the table, the faint flush of tension spreading across Emily's cheeks, the rigid postures of other family members caught in anticipation. Each observation reinforced my awareness of the gravity of the moment, the theater of moral confrontation unfolding with perfect clarity. I began methodically recounting the evidence I had gathered. The documentation of Kevin's financial manipulations hidden behind the veneer of family trust and professional legitimacy. My mind traced the flow of funds, the irregularities in accounts, the subtle diversions of investment meant for collective benefit now serving personal gain. I described these patterns with calm precision, noting sums, transfers, and the network of transactions I had observed through my work on related projects. Each point landed like a carefully placed stone, building a structure of undeniable truth that contrasted starkly with the performative confidence Kevin had cultivated for years. The reactions were immediate and overwhelming. Faces drained of color, eyes widened in shock, and the carefully maintained poise of the household cracked visibly. Kevin's posture faltered, his composure unraveling as the evidence I presented rendered his claims of legitimacy meaningless. Drinks tipped over, wine spreading across the white tablecloth in irregular patterns, unnoticed as the room absorbed the implications. Emily's hands tightened on the edge of her chair, a mixture of disbelief and fear evident in the subtle tremor of her fingers. The extended family, caught in the collision of truth and long-standing illusion, shifted uneasily, some recoiling inwardly, others leaning forward with tense curiosity. In that suspended moment, the contrast between my measured, deliberate exposition and the chaotic disintegration of Kevin's projected image became almost tangible. The calm of my delivery underscored the moral force of the revelations, each carefully considered word exposing not just the fraud itself but the complicity and blindness that had allowed it to persist. The room no longer reflected the controlled, celebratory atmosphere that had been orchestrated for months. It was replaced by raw, immediate consequences, an unraveling of illusion under the steady weight of documented truth. The collision of restraint and exposure, patience and revelation, transformed the dinner from a formal gathering into a crucible of accountability and inevitability. After that night, my life changed in ways I had only begun to comprehend. The quiet certainty of my marriage evaporated almost instantly. Emily chose her family over me, aligning with Kevin in a way that left no room for reconciliation. The decision was final, irreversible, and in that moment I understood that the life I had built, however measured and careful, had already been fractured beyond repair. I packed my belongings, leaving behind the house, the furniture, the objects that had silently marked our shared years. Each item I left behind felt like a relic of a life that had been borrowed, a collection of memories weighed down by compromises I could no longer bear. I moved into a small apartment in downtown Chattanooga, a space stripped of excess, functional, and neutral, an environment that demanded no emotional investment beyond my own. The emptiness of the rooms mirrored the clarity I needed, a canvas on which I could begin to reconstruct my sense of self without the interference of judgment or expectation. As I unpacked the few essentials I had brought, I noticed how the absence of inherited possessions and shared items left room for precision in thought and purpose, a newfound autonomy that was both stark and liberating. Simultaneously, the divorce process began, a slow, meticulous disentanglement of lives that had been intertwined by habit and circumstance. Every payment I had made, every bank account, every personal investment became subject to scrutiny, each detail examined as though the facts themselves were negotiable. I maintained a cold, deliberate approach, providing evidence, receipts, and documentation that reflected not just financial contributions, but the integrity of my decisions. In these proceedings, my sense of control and moral authority grew, each page submitted, each statement verified, reinforcing the reality that truth and diligence were the only shields capable of withstanding the distortions of family loyalty and social expectation. At the same time, Kevin's manipulations became the subject of formal investigation. His company was dissolved, and the financial deceptions that had quietly accumulated over years were laid bare. Family members, previously complacent or ignorant, faced the stark evidence of his actions. I observed the unfolding of these revelations with a measured detachment, aware of the shock, the disbelief, and the subtle panic rippling through those who had once wielded power over perception and reputation. I supplied documents, spreadsheets, and transactional records with methodical precision, ensuring that each point was undeniable, each connection traceable. The combination of legal procedure and moral exposure transformed the household from a realm of unchecked authority into a landscape of accountability. The consequences of that night reached further than any immediate reaction could suggest. The disruption of long-standing illusions, the unmasking of deception, and the recalibration of familial hierarchies demonstrated the cost of truth in a social structure built on appearances. I recognized that defending reality required not only courage but a rigorous, deliberate strategy. Each action I took, each document submitted, each careful step in the divorce and investigation process reinforced my autonomy while simultaneously dismantling the false constructs that had constrained my life. The force of these events was undeniable, the ramifications immediate and unavoidable, and yet within that upheaval I discovered a new clarity. A sense that the life I was beginning to build could finally be defined on my terms rather than in response to the expectations of others. Over the following months, I gradually shaped a new life for myself, one stripped of unnecessary weight and distraction. The apartment I had moved into was minimalistic, functional, and deliberately uncluttered. Each piece of furniture, each object I chose to keep, served a purpose beyond aesthetics. It symbolized autonomy, a reclaiming of control over my environment. The space itself became a reflection of the clarity I was seeking, a physical manifestation of the discipline and order I needed to rebuild my sense of self. The walls were bare but intentional, the rooms organized around utility rather than appearance, a deliberate contrast to the life I had left behind. Work became the anchor of my daily routine, a realm where merit was recognized and accomplishment tangible. My colleagues began to notice a subtle shift in my confidence and focus, and the acknowledgement of my professional contributions reinforced a sense of competence I had long allowed others to undermine. I engaged with projects deeply, tracing each blueprint and structural calculation with renewed precision, taking satisfaction in the exacting nature of the craft. In these hours of concentrated effort, I found a quiet validation, a proof that skill and diligence could stand independently of external approval. Beyond professional engagement, I gradually opened myself to new relationships built on respect and genuine curiosity, rather than social pretense or financial status. Encounters with others were no longer weighed against a hierarchy I was expected to navigate. Instead, I evaluated character, intellect, and shared values. Friendships emerged slowly, organically, shaped by conversations and shared interests, rather than appearances or inherited privilege. In time, I met someone whose presence required neither compromise nor performance, someone whose interest in my work and life was sincere, and whose attention was given freely rather than strategically. This connection, however subtle, reinforced the lesson that validation derived from integrity and authenticity outweighed approval extracted through conformity or sacrifice. Through these months, I rebuilt my internal equilibrium. The persistent anxiety, the quiet tension I had carried for years, gradually diminished. I began to understand that value could not be measured by comparisons or external judgments, but by adherence to personal principles, by honesty in action, and by the deliberate choices that define my own path. Each day reinforced this understanding. The quiet mornings in my minimalist apartment, the focused hours at work, the thoughtful engagement with new acquaintances, all combined to form a rhythm of life that was both stabilizing and empowering. Psychological clarity became my standard, a state of mind free from the constant evaluation that had once shaped every thought and decision. The turmoil of past interactions with Kevin and Emily receded, leaving lessons but not lingering doubts. I recognized that autonomy, measured engagement, and principled action were more valuable than the approval of those who measured success only by wealth, appearance, or superficial achievement. In that calm, deliberate space, I felt a quiet restoration of self-worth, a reconstruction of identity anchored in competence, integrity, and the freedom to live on terms defined by my own standards. Each day, the rhythm of this reconstructed life reinforced a profound understanding. Peace was possible not by escaping conflict, but by asserting control over what truly mattered. By cultivating internal standards immune to the judgments of those who had once imposed them. Over time, I came to understand what it truly meant to be enough. The lesson was not abstract. It revealed itself in the quiet moments of ordinary life, in the uncluttered lines of my apartment, in the meticulous attention I gave to my work, in the relationships I cultivated on mutual respect rather than convenience or expectation. I realized that approval from others had never been a reliable measure of value. The judgment of family, colleagues, or social peers had shaped my perception for years, but it had been a fragile external standard, subject to whim and bias. True measure, I discovered, came from my own actions, principles, and the consistency with which I honored them. The dissolution of my marriage, once a source of grief and disorientation, revealed itself as a necessary catalyst for freedom. In leaving the house, the possessions, the symbolic anchors of a shared life that had silently constrained me, I had removed more than material items. I had removed the weight of unspoken expectations and the subtle erosion of self-worth that had accompanied them. The divorce was not merely a legal process, but a moral and psychological release, an acknowledgement that integrity sometimes demands decisive separation. In that space, the concept of enough began to take shape as a lived reality rather than a philosophical notion. I saw the value of my work with fresh eyes, appreciating the complexity and impact of projects I had once discounted in the pursuit of perceived recognition. Each blueprint, each structural calculation, each design review became a testament to competence and careful judgment, an affirmation of skill exercised for its own sake and for the tangible outcomes it produced. Recognition from colleagues, once secondary, became meaningful because it reflected awareness and understanding rather than hierarchy or comparison. I felt satisfaction that was steady and self-contained, unshaken by the assessments of those who had once diminished me. Relationships, too, acquired a new clarity. Friendships and personal connections emerged in environments of mutual respect, built upon authenticity rather than social positioning. These interactions reinforced the understanding that the quality of engagement mattered far more than quantity or superficial appearances. I no longer measured my worth through the lens of others' expectations, but through the depth of attention, the honesty of participation, and the alignment of my choices with my own principles. Each relationship became an active reflection of my values, a mirror of the standards I had cultivated internally. Sitting at my desk, surrounded by the orderly arrangement of projects and notes, I felt a profound sense of equilibrium. The apartment, the work, the deliberate rhythms of daily life were symbols of a personal autonomy I had long sought but never fully grasped. I was no longer defending my existence to the world. I had no need to justify my life, my decisions, or my accomplishments. They were enough, as they were, without embellishment or apology. The clarity of moral purpose and the quiet assertion of integrity had replaced the tension of external validation. In that space of stillness and deliberate order, I understood that sometimes destruction is not an end but a prerequisite for creation. The collapse of illusions, of marriage, of family authority, of false measures of success, had cleared a path for a life aligned with my own understanding of value. I had learned that internal standards, cultivated through reflection, effort, and ethical consistency, were the truest measure of sufficiency. The sense of being enough became a lens through which I viewed every action and decision, a standard that required no justification, demanded no permission, and offered profound freedom. In embracing this understanding, I felt a final, steady calm. My life, my work, my relationships, my very being were sufficient.